Back. Good morning to everybody. Mayor Kevin Burns is unable to be here until later. He will join us. He's at a press conference this morning, so I will be filling in, managing the meeting. So welcome everybody to the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus Environment Committee meeting. I am Edith Macker. I'm the Director of Environmental Initiatives at the Mayor's Caucus. And we're really super excited about the panel and the discussion that we have today. While everyone, I think it's I call it the popcorn when people pop up on the screen, but that seems to be simmering down. Let me turn it over to Cheryl Scott, the sustainability specialist, just to go over the now very familiar rules of working on Zoom, but just talk about the logistics of the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so if you could just virtually introduce yourselves by way of adding your organization after your name, go to the participants panel, and then there should be a drop-down menu with more or 3 dots, and just add your organization after your name. Also, we'll be recording the meeting, and it'll be available on the Environment Committee webpage. We ask you to also please use the chat for questions because we do have a packed agenda today. If we're not able to get to your question after each speaker, we do have a little bit of time at the end of the meeting as well.
And I just want to also point out that Cheryl manages a really rich Environment Committee page, and so that you can get past presentations and all the speakers and just get a sense of the history of the Environment Committee there. So if you haven't visited that, please do. And I guess Cheryl can put that in the chat when she has a second. So again, welcome everybody. We're really pleased with the turnout today. And as many of you know, we are preparing to release a regional climate plan. And this is the first big attempt for the region to get its arms around the needed climate action. And we are finalizing that plan. But while we're doing that, we thought this was a really good time to pause and visit the topic of climate communications and just help prepare all of our member communities, the constituents they serve, to really understand messages about climate change. And I'll just share a brief story. When I first started this journey, preparing the Mayor's Caucus members for action on climate was in 2017. And we, at the time, I think there was still some hesitation among the leadership about discussing climate. So stepping right into awareness about climate in 2017, I feel like we've really evolved. I think most of our municipalities now are really ready to receive information about climate, and we've had such strong participation in the climate planning process. But still, in your communities, in our member communities, we have climate activists, and many of you are here today. You can give me a thumbs up if you're a sustainability commissioner and you're pushing your community on climate action. We have a lot of that. We have still some leaders that may not understand really what climate action means at the local government scale and what that means when they're talking to their either sustainability commissioners or their Go Green groups or climate professionals. And then, of course, there are going to be climate deniers in your community too. So what we've assembled today here is an amazing array of talent and knowledge on climate communications. And so that the panel that we have will help us understand what we know about climate, what the public, specifically your public, your communities, this is fascinating work, knows and understands and perceives about climate. We'll then learn about some tools and some messaging to help bridge that gap and how to communicate messages about climate in a positive, common way. And then finally, we'll learn really about the value and the importance and the need for essential climate empowerment if we're going to take united climate action and get the job done. So with that, I would like to turn it over to our first speaker, who's Dr. Jennifer Marlon, who's a research scientist and lecturer at the Yale School of Environment and the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication. And Dr. Marlon uses a range of methods to understand public perception and response to climate change and extreme weather events. And she'll be telling us about one of her recent projects, which is super exciting, the Yale Climate Opinion Maps. If I can turn it over to Dr. Jennifer Marlon.
Great. Thank you so much, Edith. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. And I really appreciate the opportunity to share some of our research from the Yale Program on climate change communication. Can you all see my screen okay? Is that working? Great, thank you. So happy almost Earth Day. It is really good to be with you. And I'm just going to dive right in and make the most of our time. So this issue can be quite complicated, especially for the average American who is not thinking a whole lot about it on a day-to-day basis. They don't live it and breathe it like many of us do. So we start by simplifying the idea into just 5 key ideas. And in fact, you can reduce it to 10 words effectively. It's real, climate change is happening. The planet has warmed about 1 degree Celsius, roughly 2 degrees Fahrenheit in the past century or so. The cause of that warming is burning fossil fuels, about 75%, and about 25% land use change in agriculture. So those are all human activities. The warming is completely due to human activities. It's bad. So even though warming temperatures might be good for opening up, Arctic shipping routes because ice is melting, overwhelmingly in the long term and even in the near term for most of us, it's bad. So just one little example of what the changes are that we're already seeing. So think about the heat wave season, the number of weeks in an average year that across the US we can experience a heat wave. In the 1960s, that was about 2 to 3 weeks long. Now it's about 10 weeks long, the heat wave season. So that's just the time when we're going to be having, needing to be prepared for that. Wildfires out west, we all know area burned has practically doubled or roughly doubled about in the past few decades. Here in the East and in the Northeast in particular, we don't get wildfires or hurricanes so much, but we get extreme flooding. And so depending on where you are, the negative impacts vary. The fourth key idea is that scientists agree about 1, 2, and 3. Overwhelmingly, there's very strong scientific consensus. 97% of scientists agree. And then fifth, a key idea that many of us often forget is that there's hope. Despite all that bad news, there's a lot of reason for hope. And we have many of the tools that we need to address the issue. So what we do with our surveys, and we've been doing these surveys for about 12 years, and each time we do one, it's a nationally representative survey, and we do it in the spring and fall, asking at least 1,000 people, sometimes 1,500 people, so that we can get accurate estimates plus or minus 3 percentage points on a given statistic. And so you see the trends here over the past 10, 11 years. It started back in 2009 at 71% of Americans who think global warming is happening. Big drop. If you want to talk about that drop and what caused it during the Q&A, I'm happy to revisit it. But basically, since then, we've been climbing gradually back up. Now we're at about 72% of Americans who think that global warming is happening, about 13% who say, no, the planet is not warming. So majorities say it's happening. A little bit more confusion comes when we ask about what's causing it. About 58% will say it's caused mostly by human activities. And of course, it is entirely caused by human activities. So that's a misunderstanding right there that is still quite prevalent. About 29% believe that the warming is happening, but that it's due to changes in solar output or natural cycles or volcanic activity, something like that. In fact, volcanic activity cools the planet. It doesn't explain the warming, and neither do natural cycles or changes in solar output. Scientists have checked all those explanations. They don't work. The third key idea, where does the public stand on the idea that scientists agree? Well, this is an even bigger misconception that is pervasive out there. So we've asked, if you had to estimate what percentage of scientists think that global warming is happening and human caused, most people will give you a number less than 90%, so somewhere in here. And only 21% will give you a number that's above 90%. This is the correct answer. It's about 97% or higher. It's about as sure as physicians are that smoking is, a causal factor for lung cancer. So very sure about that. So that's a gap and an opportunity for talking about climate change. Well, and let me just back up for a minute because this is really important. And there are a few reasons why this misinformation is out there, why this confusion exists. One is that scientists are not trained to talk at scale to the public at large about what we know, what we already agree on. Scientists focus on the leading edge of scientific advances and controversy. And so many scientists are now working to communicate at scale what we already know about climate change and where there's no debate, but many of them still don't do that and aren't trained to do it. So that's one reason. Scientists aren't great communicators about this. Another reason is that, of course, we've had false balance in the media, which, you get someone from industry and you get a climate expert and they appear to be coming from, evidence-based, making evidence-based arguments, but they're not really. And that confuses the public because they're seen as equal, given equal weight when they shouldn't be. And so, and then finally, there has been, of course, a large effort, well-funded effort to sow doubt and confusion about this very idea that scientists agree. And that's basically oil and gas interests taking a playbook from the tobacco wars and using it to just insert a little bit of confusion to delay action. And so it's been very effective over time. And that has contributed to this confusion. So if you help people understand the scientific consensus, they're more likely to believe that it's caused by human activities and believe that we should act. So how bad is it? The third idea, or the fourth idea, how bad is it? Well, we use a proxy of worry for that. And we find that only about 27% of Americans are very worried. About 2/3 say they're somewhat worried or very worried. So overall, Americans are still not really seeing this as super relevant to their day-to-day lives. And if you take a political lens, you start to see a little bit of nuance here. And this is where we also start to see what has happened over the past few years. So this is going back to 2008 to April 2020. And we asked before the election, do you think global warming should be, what priority would you give it for the president and Congress? And you can see very clearly that there's been a surge in prioritization among Democrats. Independents, it's been increasing over time, but almost completely flat among Republicans in terms of how high a priority this issue should be. And you saw this play out during the election because everyone was talking about it. For the first time, climate change was in everyone's speech at some point, and that's because this was happening. The momentum was growing and everyone is aware of it. And then when Biden took office, he pivoted and started talking even more about climate change, in fact, and it's a real emphasis now. And that's because also of this data. He knows that his base is really motivated to do something about this problem. And so there's a lot going on here, but it just lets you dig a little bit more deeply into not only how much people think global warming should be a priority, but how much of a priority should it be relative to all these other issues that rightly so are competing for our attention. And so you can just focus on these boxes here. For liberal Democrats, for the first time ever, again, global warming was ranked number 2 in terms of a voting issue priority, number 2. And notice that number 3 is environmental protection. So the top 2 out of 3 issues are about the environment. So for liberal Democrats, they are connecting the dots between a threat to our health, to our quality of life, to our future generations. They see the environment and climate change as an imminent and severe threat we need to work on right now. For moderate and conservative Democrats, it ranks number 8. For liberal and moderate Republicans, number 23. And then we have conservative Republicans, it does remain dead last, especially when using the words global warming, which are a bit more divisive than climate change, but I don't know that there would be much difference if we use climate change. So that's some bad news. Perhaps it highlights the divisiveness, the political divisiveness, but it's not all bad news. And In fact, this is incredibly encouraging data. And what you're seeing here are red dots that represent the responses of conservative Republicans. The pink represent liberal to moderate Republicans, blue liberal Democrats, and then dark blue. I'm sorry, the dark blue is the liberal Democrats, moderate conservative Democrats in pale blue. And then what you see is overwhelming majority support even among conservative Republicans for policies to address climate change, like providing tax rebates for people who purchase energy efficient vehicles or solar panels. Everyone supports funding more research into renewable energy. Renewable energy on public land, generating that from solar and wind, for example. Even regulating carbon dioxide as a pollutant, 51% of conservative Republicans, which is surprising. Most people don't realize that. So you can go on down here. It's really not until you start proposing policies like require electric utilities to produce 100% of their electricity from wind, solar, other sources, then you start to get opposition or resistance, only support from about 28% of conservative Republicans. And then this is eliminating all carbon pollution created by coal, oil, and natural gas by 2050. But even here, 51% of liberal moderate Republicans support that. So there is pretty strong bipartisan support for a range of policies. So those are all national numbers and a little bit of information about the politics. But one of the products that we've produced based on this data set of 25 survey waves over 12 years, tens of thousands of respondents, has been to pool that information and use some fancy statistics, combine our survey data with census data, carbon emissions data, economic data, voting data, and produce estimates, not just of the national numbers, the national survey results, like this one, 63% of American adults are worried about global warming, but estimates for every single county. 3,142 counties across the US now, we have estimates of what people in your local area think. And we also have it for congressional districts, metro areas, and states. And so now you can start to see some of the geographic variability. You can see in the Chicago area a little bit into the orange color here. Anything that's yellow or orange is above 50%. The blues are reflecting belief or agreement with the issue that's less than 50%. And so you can see a few patterns now in the Midwest is where you get a little bit less concern, but you get, for example, strong levels of worry in the southernmost part of Texas. And this pattern is new. We weren't expecting it, but the maps revealed it. And it's because Hispanics and Latinx communities are the most concerned racial and ethnic group about climate change in the US. And so you can see some of these patterns revealed here. So one of the things these maps really drive home is how people think about the threat of climate change. So for example, this is a map showing the percentage of people who think global warming will harm plants and animals is 71%. The whole map, including the Chicago area, is pretty orange and yellow. But when you ask them, do you think it will harm people in the US? It gets a little bit more pale. Now we're in like maybe 50, 55% almost everywhere. And then when you say, do you think it will harm you personally? The whole map turns blue. It's less than 50%. So no matter where you are, actually in the Chicago area, it looks like it's just over 50% here. But the point is that people still see this issue as distant in space, in time, affecting polar bears, developing countries, future generations. They're not connecting the dots between worsening hurricanes and floods and wildfires that are affecting not just local cities, but economies and transportation and the electrical grid. But they're not connecting the dots between these localized extreme weather events and the cascading and systemic effects that have on all of us. We are all dependent on food that comes oftentimes from far away, and products and goods and services that come from neighboring or adjacent counties or cities or states or countries. And so people are still not connecting the dots because they think the damages are far away, they're in the future, when in fact they are here and now. And so connecting those dots for people is one of the vital communication tasks that all of us can do. You can take any one of those counties or congressional districts. And if you go to our website, we have a tool called the Climate Opinion Factsheets, and you can put and select your state or district, select the questions you want here, and then it will produce a little fact sheet for you so you can get the details about what people think in your local area. This is just one example from Will County that I did. It takes like 30 seconds. And you get a nice graphic, and it shows, that majorities believe it's happening in human caused. Most people in this county are worried, except still 40% think it's going to harm them personally, only 40%. And then you see the strong support for various policies at the national level. These are national policies because our surveys are national, but when we have asked about, do you support bike lanes? Do you support zoning rules that would promote, reducing single family homes or things like this that would pertain to more local issues, we often still get surprising levels of support, higher than most people would think. Okay, so another tool I want to introduce is that you can think of the public, well, we often think of the public as kind of a monolithic whole or in terms of just political divisions. But a useful tool that we have developed is thinking about the public in terms of 6 different audiences. And we've identified these based on people's attitudes and beliefs and fears and policy support. And what we find is that these 6 audiences range from 26% who are alarmed about the issue. They're convinced it's happening, it's caused by human activities, they support policy, assertive, aggressive policy in many cases. 29% are concerned, which means they're worried about it, but they don't see it as an urgent threat. 19% are cautious, meaning they're not sure it's happening or not. Is it caused by human activities or not? Think of them as fence sitters. 6% are disengaged. They need more information. It's not on their radar at all. 12% are doubtful that it's happening. And if it is happening, they think it's due to something other than human activity, so they don't support policies to address it. And then 8% are dismissive, believing that it is not happening. And in fact, most of this group believes it's a hoax. Now, this is also really important because this is a misperception that most people believe this group is much larger than it actually is. It's only 8%, but they're incredibly vocal. I published an op-ed on climate change just a couple of days ago. At 8 o'clock in the morning, I signed on. There were 326 comments, and many of them were negative and skeptical and attacking the idea, basically. And that is people's experience, especially online. When you talk about this issue, there appears to be much more resistance than there actually is in the public as a whole. So we generalize when we shouldn't, and that prevents us from talking about it in many cases. So it's important to remember that doubtful and dismissive group is small. We ask people, if you could ask an expert on global warming one question, which question would you ask? The alarmed and concerned want to know about solutions. What can I do to reduce global warming? So that's a little bit more than half the public. And then another, probably more than a third, say, what harm will it cause and why should I care? They need to know more about the impacts and more about the damages and why it's an urgent priority. And then finally, the doubtful and dismissive want to know, how do you know that global warming is happening? How do you know it's human caused? And really the subtext here is, why should I trust you? Because oftentimes the messengers talking about this issue are liberal politicians, environmentalists, or scientists like myself. And those are not the most trusted messengers for this group. So the more that Republican leaders, conservative leaders, community leaders with worldviews and values more similar to this, this group, which leans conservative and also male, the more we can hear from those leaders about the importance of acting on climate change, or at least, moving towards renewable energy, the better. So these groups are not static over time. They've been changing. The alarmed has grown in particular. The other groups have basically remained stable. The disengaged has shrunk quite a bit. So more people the disengaged group mainly moved into the cautious or concerned or the alarmed, and people are kind of moving up in terms of concern. So this is a large number, in terms of an issue public, the people who want to take action and are ready to take action, and it's growing. So this is very encouraging. But there still remains a major misperception that that power, that movement is smaller than we realize. Everyone underestimates, whether you're a liberal Democrat, you're living in a suburban area, or you're evangelical, all of these different demographic groups underestimate how much people even think that global warming is happening. So this is kind of setting the social norm. So we need to help people understand that more people care about the issue and that support is more widespread than we think, because that's what kind of sets the tone. So just to wrap up with a few recommendations here. One is quite easy, talk about it. We're not talking about it, even though in our small circles and bubbles, it seems like we are. For the rest of the public, this issue is really not coming up very much in their daily life. 64% say they rarely or never talk about it with family and friends. Only 36% say they often or occasionally talk about it. So all of us can help change that. We've actually asked and mapped the percentage of people who say they're interested in news stories about the impacts of global warming on your local community, and it's 78%. People really want to know more about what's going on, what the impacts are, but also what the solutions are. These numbers were in the upper 70s across a range of questions about solutions, actions, impacts. Here I'm mapping the number of people who, or percentage of people interested in news stories about actions being taken by your local community. So you can see the patterns here, and you can dive in a little bit more. This is 80% in DuPage County who want to hear more news stories. And these data also have been useful for journalists who can tell local stories about their communities, as well as for decision makers, community leaders, educators, and so on. Another thing, especially that community leaders can do and mayors can do and other leaders can do, is to ask people to act. One of the main barriers we find when we say, why haven't you acted? Why wouldn't you, why aren't you with an organization or donating time or money? People say, no one asked me. No one asked me to. That's like the number one reason. So just asking people to take action can be a powerful step as well. These data are showing by the 6 Americas how many people are willing to take political action. And you see that majority of the alarmed group is, and about a third of the concerned group is, and then it declines as you go towards the doubtful and dismissive end of the spectrum, not surprisingly. But this is translating into millions and millions of Americans who are willing to take action and are not yet taking action. If you want to know about what some examples are of action, we have a whole unit dedicated to finding, identifying, and telling stories about local communities who are taking different kinds of action. And it's called Yale Climate Connections. These are 90-second radio spots. They're airing on hundreds of stations around the country every day right now, but they're also available as a podcast or just a transcript online. And these are just a few examples, and many of these are from the Chicago area, about making solar simple for residents, about an alternative to cremation that's green and carbon friendly, about making better batteries at Argonne, and on and on. So there are lots of examples you can find. I just took a screenshot of our website here showing you some of the stories that we've already told about this area. And then I'll just leave you with some of our research. You can reach out to me through email also, and I'm also right now happy to answer questions. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Marlon. Totally fascinating. And we have some great questions in the chat, and I would encourage everybody else to please go ahead and add questions to the chat. So we do have time. We've got a good dialogue we can start here. So we have a question from Dorel, who lives in Mokina in Will County. And that question, you addressed it, but let's see if I'll just go into details here. So the question is about the number of surveyed, particularly in Will County. So when you say 1,000 people surveyed, how does that correlate when you break it down to counties? In other words, when I quote data for my county, Will County, how many people in Will County were surveyed?
This is a great question. So, and it gets to the heart of survey research. So we've all become a little skeptical of political polling. They've gotten it wrong in some important instances previously, because what they're doing, of course, is asking a few people across the country and then generalizing or extrapolating to the broader public as a whole. They're not sampling necessarily in every local town and city across the US, but the numbers, if you sample enough people, you can generalize accurately. Luckily, these polls are not political polls, and they are not fraught with a lot of the problems that political polls are, because we're asking relatively more neutral questions. And so we are not sampling people in every county. What we're doing is we're sampling people in every state from different parts of the state. And then we're looking at how people's views, whether you are male or female, what race or ethnicity you are. We're looking at where you are living locally, and what the politics are in that local area. We're looking at the industry in that local area, and we're able to build a statistical model that estimates people's views, given all of those demographic and geographic and economic and political characteristics of your local town. We're able to basically predict people's views with a statistical model. So I can't tell you how many people in your county were surveyed, but I can tell you that nationally, tens of thousands of people were surveyed to produce estimates for your town. And we have validated those estimates using independent. We used 6 independent surveys at great cost to validate the results. And so these results have been used by hundreds of organizations and journalists. Our maps have been on the cover of the New York Times. Senator Whitehouse from Rhode Island has brought the maps to the floor of Congress and presented them because they have been so rigorously tested and validated. And in fact, we've even had organizations say, I don't believe your numbers, we're going to go do our own survey. They've done their own survey. This was in Florida. And then they came back and said, our numbers match. We're impressed. So, and continually, Indiana has a whole statewide survey that they duplicated our questions. I just found it online yesterday. And so we're always comparing those local surveys as further validation to our numbers. And they check out surprisingly well. So if that should give a little bit of credibility to it, but I know it is a little disorienting when I say we didn't survey. I can't tell you, maybe we only surveyed 4 people in your actual county, many more in your state, but I assure you, we can still predict the percentage of people and how they feel about this issue, because our views are really determined socially. That was a long answer, but it's an important question. And so I just wanted to take the time.
Dorel, does that answer your question? And I think just to keep the dialogue, we can allow you to ask questions if you want to unmute yourself. So I'll call on you, and if you're able to unmute in time. So Kim Stone, do you want to ask your question directly? Fascinating question about the timing in our Texas storm.
Hi. I'm wondering, about the data that showed people's level, whether people thought it was going to impact them.
Mm-hmm.
That map had primarily blue in the whole country, but there was some yellow in Texas. And I'm just curious, I think you said the survey was done in April, which would have been after the storm that knocked out power to a good chunk of the state for a lot of days. So I'm curious whether that might have impacted the data.
Yeah, it's interesting. it may have impacted these estimates. We would never be able to tell because we're combining, we're leveraging information about people in other places of Texas, other parts of Texas, to make estimates for each county. So we can't disentangle that, but I'm sure that that had an effect. Because we ask questions like, do you think global warming is affecting the weather, for example? And so people might have been more likely to say yes to that question when we asked it. We definitely see that residents of Houston have higher levels of perceived harm than other counties. And in fact, I'm starting to make maps of how people respond specifically to flooding, to hurricanes, and the geographic patterns just pop right off the map in that case. And in fact, I can see the impact of Hurricane Harvey, for example, on people's attitudes of Houston. So these events are kind of built in, but because we're pooling information from from nearby geographic regions, that we can't really disentangle the specific effect of a single weather event.
Let me just ask a quick follow-up question. I'm wondering whether doing sort of localized surveys in areas that do have some extreme weather event would help communicate to people the message that climate change is actually harming them personally. You know, if you went in right after the hurricane or the winter storm, or came in after a big flood, did a quick survey in just one section of the country where they were impacted, would that help to provide education by doing a survey?
It wouldn't help to provide education doing a survey. It's actually very expensive to conduct surveys. So if you took that same money and simply just took the scientific evidence we already have, connecting it, and did a media campaign helping people understand what the the weather data show for that local area and the economic damages that it caused, that would probably be a better bang for your buck if you're trying to educate people than doing a survey, because we actually already have so much evidence that shows that weather events, flooding in particular, are in the northeastern US, our heavy precipitation events are 71% higher than they were a few decades ago. Our rainfall is coming in much heavier downpours than it used to. And that's adding tremendous stress to our wastewater treatment, to our stormwater drains, to our, all kinds of infrastructure, roads, bridges, tunnels. Already, of course, our infrastructure is in terrible shape. It was given an overall grade of a D+, I think, by the Association of Civil Engineers. And so this extreme weather is causing real damage already. So just kind of communicating some of those messages, those reports are all publicly available online. You can look up America's Infrastructure Report, promoting that and helping people see and make the connection between our crumbling and aging infrastructure and the growing intensity of extreme weather events. That alone, people don't know that. No, many people don't know that. So I think that's an education campaign that needs to happen.
Thank you. Let's take the next question. So there's some great questions related to communication strategies and tools, and I think we'll save those for the end after all the other presenters have. But we do have some specific questions for Dr. Marlon. Natalie Zine, if you want to unmute yourself and ask that from Village of Oswego.
Sure, yeah. I think it's the previous slide or map, but you mentioned that there was a higher level of concern among the Latin and Hispanic populations. I just wondered if you had an idea of why that is. What are they concerned with that the rest of the country is less concerned with?
Yeah, this is a great question. It was a real surprise because common knowledge in the environmental and advocacy community was that, it's white women who are most concerned, often older white women who are most concerned about this issue. And it turns out that's just not true, that Latin and Hispanic communities are among the most concerned. And researchers have been digging into this to try to understand why is it. And what we found is that, in fact, all of Latin America Brazil has 50% of its population in the alarmed category, for example. We're just doing surveys in Brazil now, but many Latin American countries have higher levels of concern about environmental issues in general. And there are a bunch of hypotheses about this. It appears to be cultural. In large part, it appears to be cultural. It could be stronger connectivity to agricultural work and the land, a greater land ethic. It could have to do with a longer history of their ancestors being in a particular place. We're not really sure. We know that it's linked to many different factors, but concern is high. But one of the limitations is that their political engagement and their environmental actions are not at correspondingly high levels. So they're very concerned. They're not as mobilized or motivated to act yet, consistent with that concern. So it's a pattern that's being researched. There's not a single answer really yet as to why.
So next question is from Tessa Murray, another one of our Greenest Region Corps members. So Tessa, do you want to ask that question? If she can't unmute quickly, I'll do it for her.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, one of the last pages that you posted was, I believe it showed the percentage of respondents who are willing to do certain actions.
Mhm.
I was just hoping to revisit that page quickly so I could get a second look.
Sure. This one, is this it?
Yes, that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Right. It's just important to keep in mind that the sizes of these groups up at the top are different. So the alarmed, for example, and the concerned represent about half the American, a little more than half the American public. So, and you can go back to that bubble slide, which is also on our website. If you Google global warming 6 Americas, you can see what the relative proportions are of each of these 6 groups.
So Dr. Marlon, I'm going to consolidate some questions here, and then we'll pick up, I think, when everybody has a chance to present. I think some of the questions about strategies we'll come back to. But just a question, an observation of the maps and the opinions around the country. So Ned Gardner with NOAA and I had similar observations. Ned was asking about the less concerned areas seem to be in regions where extractive industries have a large presence and role in the local economies. And I saw some interesting inconsistencies downstate Illinois. Like there's one county there that's really bright orange and red. That's our agricultural region. So I'm just wondering if you can talk about what you know about the economies that are both supported by continuation of fossil fuel use, and then those that are highly impacted like agriculture, and how that impacts opinion. If that is that fair, Ned, to generalize a question like that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
May I add a little bit to that, Edith?
Sure.
This is Mavis. I think some of those red dots are college towns.
Yes.
So I wanted to ask about that.
Yes, and in fact, that's one thing that popped out when we first produced the maps. We thought, wait, what are all these, dark orange? That's Cornell right there. We've got like University of Wisconsin. Yeah, these are often college
Champaign.
towns.
Okay.
I thought Champaign was west. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So yes, we do find that university and college towns tend
Ames,
to have,
Iowa, I think.
Iowa. Okay. Yeah, I don't know the counties, but some of the other patterns it is true. And if you look at, this is a screenshot of the website. I'm not going to flip to the website, but we do actually include information about carbon intensity emissions in the model predicting opinions, because it turns out that if your state or your county is heavily dependent on coal mining, for example, or oil extraction, then that does influence your views. And so that is influencing the views in some of these counties and areas, for example, where the economies are tied to fossil fuel use and ongoing consumption and production. So So that is what you're seeing. You're seeing the effect of that in these regions and in Wyoming and in parts of the Dakotas, for example. These counties are often have high populations of Native Americans. Some of these are reservations who tend to have populations that are more concerned and worried. So you are seeing the influence of different factors, whether it's, you know, fossil fuel dependent economies or cultural views, because we're including many of these factors as predictors in our model of opinions. So that's, yeah, these college towns are part of that pattern, and they can be emerging for different reasons. And yeah, in Utah, different factors, more religious, you know, and cultural influences, for example, driving opinions there. But there is also mining there. In terms of agriculture, yeah, we find big differences in people with rural versus urban versus suburban views, for example. There's a difference there as well.
So unfortunately, I think we should wrap up, and I'm hoping we have a little bit of time at the end. But thank you. That was absolutely terrific. And thank you, Frank, for sharing the wonderful links in the chat. If you didn't grab those, make sure you get those. We also have some that we'll have on the Environment Committee webpage, and it was in the agenda as well. But let's pivot now towards looking at communication solutions, and also strongly based in research. We're really pleased to have with us Jennifer Giordano, the second Jennifer on our panels today, who's Vice President of Marketing at Eco America. And I'll ask Jennifer to do an introduction a little bit more about Eco America, but just we do have a good relationship with Eco America, a national group that has been really impressive in making connections to different thought leaders on climate. And so their methodology is really exciting. We're also very proud to have Mayor Kevin Burns on it's called the Path to Positive, which is the group that of Eco America that specifically deals with communities as part of the Path to Positive Leadership Circle. Those work with city leaders, and Jennifer, who is a nature lover, and this is Kevin Burns' role here, is to make observations about something interesting about you. So I'm going to try to do this, although he's much funnier than I am, but it's Tamalpais. So Jennifer is frequently found hiking on Mount Tamalpais, and she tried to show us that it's just outside her window today where she lives in California. So if I could, Jennifer, turn it over to you, and then you have yet another Jennifer that you'll be introducing. So.
Yes, lots of Jennifers, and we're all fabulous. Thank you so much, Dr. Marlon. Really fascinating presentation. Eco America and Jennifer Roberts, well, there's a little video coming up and she'll talk more about it, but Eco America works with to generate public support and political resolve for climate solutions in the United States. We do that through our 3 programs, health, faith, and communities. And the communities piece I will focus on today, and Jennifer Roberts is the director for our communities program and Path to Positive Communities. And as Edith noted, yes, Eric Burns is part of that. We provide resources, like we have a weekly webcast series. I'll chat out all the information here, so you can subscribe for updates for our we have resources such as climate action fact sheets. We also have our big annual American Climate Leadership Summit coming up on the 27th through 29th, and I'll chat out details there. I'd love to see everyone there. So anyway, we can head into Jennifer Roberts' short video, and then if there's any questions, we can talk about that either right immediately following or at the end of all the presentations.
Well, Cheryl's going to pull up the video. I think, Cheryl, do you want people to turn off their cameras just for bandwidth here? I'm trying to play a video.
Yes, if everyone could just turn off their cameras to preserve bandwidth, and then we'll play this short video. And Edith, if you could just let me know that the audio's working.
Sure.
Good morning. I'm Jennifer Roberts, former mayor of Charlotte and director of Path to Positive Communities for Eco America. I thought I'd speak to you today from one of our great greenways here in Charlotte, my virtual background. Anyway, first of all, congratulations on your Greenest Region Compact. That's amazing. You have 135 communities that have adopted it, 6 million people. It's such a huge regional sustainability collaborative, so you should be celebrating. And now you want to make sure that your constituents know about it, know why it's important, and also how they can participate. You know that residents have varying degrees of awareness about sustainability and climate change, and even the climate impacts and how they affect them, their families, their health, and their lives. There may even be city and town staff and other elected officials who need a better understanding in order to fully support the progress you've made with the Greenest Region Compact. You may even find there's some city department heads who aren't sustainability directors. Maybe they work in solid waste or water quality, and they may not understand how their job relates directly to reducing climate impacts. So you might have an opportunity to engage with staff as well. We know from our Eco America research that talking about polar bears and ice caps doesn't move most Americans to act. But we know that emphasizing positive benefits and shared values like resilience, energy independence, the innovative American spirit, clean air, healthy lives, lower utility costs, and strong community cohesion, all of those go farther in moving people to action than dwelling on the doom and gloom of pollution and global warming. So we have shared research and guidance in a number of online resources that you can find at pathtopositive.org and the ecoamerica.org websites. I'm going to just tell you about a few of them. I hope you'll consider having Eco America help you run a free ambassador training for your staffs, your constituents, or both, to help bolster their support of your Greenest Region Compact and their willingness to engage in solutions to help you reach your goals. So these guides can be downloaded and on our pathtopositive.org website. The first one I'm going to talk about is Moving Forward, a guide to building momentum on climate solutions in your community. This guide provides policymakers ideas and resources to help you reach the Greenest Region goals. By embedding local solutions in planning and management, you can also achieve financial benefits and sometimes make changes without a whole lot of extra cost. You can reinvest savings in climate action and build your momentum and address climate change and sustainability at the local level. So these guides are especially helpful for leaders of small and mid-sized communities that you want to do lead on climate and sustainability, but you may not have that sustainability director to really help guide you. So other resources that we have to help you present clear, positive, inclusive, and relevant messages. We have on our website a sample letter to the community to talk about your commitment to the Greenest Region. You want to talk about it. You want to broadcast your achievement. You want to help people learn how to engage. So you should put it in blogs, newsletters, and on your website. We also have this guide called Let's Talk Communities and Climate. And this is guidance to empower effective messages that are bipartisan, communicating on climate change and sustainability in ways that we know from our research helps move people to action. We also have at Eco America, we have a faith outreach and a health outreach because we know that faith leaders think about messaging in a different way as do health professionals. And so we have our faith outreach is called Blessed Tomorrow. And Blessed Tomorrow also has a moving forward guide that reaches out to pastors, imams, rabbis, and other faith leaders who can help move their congregations and their communities to support your goals and the Greenest Region Compact. There's also a Let's Talk Faith and Climate guide, again, to put some of that climate action into more faith-centered language. Then we have our Climate for Health program that reaches out to health professionals. And we know everybody cares about their health. We know that it is something that really motivates people to act. We also know from our research that Americans trust doctors and nurses. And we know they've had a lot of contact during the time of COVID. but they listen to them. And they listen to what they say about air quality, water quality, and other things that impact their everyday lives. So we have a guide, Let's Talk Health and Climate, which is for health professionals to guide them in being great advocates. We also have something that has been reached out to quite a bit, and this is available online because it's been so important during COVID and with eco-anxiety around climate change, and that is mental health in our changing climate. This was done in collaboration with the American Psychological Association, and it reviews the implications of a changing climate on personal and public health, and provides pretty good guidance for community leaders to prepare and address climate impacts. So whether it is the trauma from a climate severe weather event where people are displaced, where property is lost, where lives are lost, it gives you some guidance on how to prepare for that and working with your community. And it also provides steps to build resilience against future challenges and trauma. So these are just some of our resources. We look forward to working with the Metro Mayor's Caucus, with the Greenest Region Compact. We want to help you celebrate your achievement and help you move all of your cities and towns closer to achieving the goals that are laid out in that compact. Public and community engagement is key. You want the public to buy into it. You want them to feel vested in the outcome. And if there are ballot initiatives, you want them to vote to support them. That community engagement is going to be key to the continued success of your region taking the sustainability and climate action. So I want to thank you for your time. And although I can't be there today, the Director of Research and Marketing for Eco America, another Jennifer Giordano, is online with you today, and she can answer any questions you have about our resources and our programs. And again, I really thank you for your time. Thanks so much for having me. And I hope that next time I can do this in person and live.
That worked well. Thank you for showing that video. And we're really sorry Jennifer couldn't be here with us, but it was really nice to have her messages and connection. Jennifer, is there any thing you want to offer to wrap up? We did have some chat, just powerful words, if you saw that one. So kudos for the messaging and the pivot. I don't know if you just wanted to respond to that.
Yeah, I did. Thanks so much. Yeah, I just said I'm open to help any way we can. If you're interested in any of our programs, please definitely send an email to Edith, and she'll send it my way. I chatted out some of our resources. You'll find them at ecoamerica.org or Path to Positive. Yeah, again, happy to take any questions or just send an email to Edith, and I'd be happy to help.
Quick pop on the chat.
Edith, I've got a question.
Sure.
Kim. I've been working on climate change for 31 years now. So it's, something that's front and center for me, but on the city council, there are 6 other people, and all of them, the environment is Kim's thing. And they all say, well, we understand that climate change is a thing and it's your topic you're concerned about. And I can get them to move on. I think someone said in the chat something about the energy savings and the money savings associated with it. I can get them to move on those sorts of things, but they certainly don't understand the urgency of it. And I'm wondering if some of the resources here would be useful for other elected officials to try and bring them up to the level we need them to be at to take action.
Sure, I think so. There's, I'll chat out the Let's Talk Climate resource. Path to Positive Community, there's a moving forward guide too that might be helpful. And I will absolutely send that your way. Mayor Burns, do you have any comments about that?
I do not. I just wanted to echo everything you just said too. I do have a question though for Kim. Kim, is your council makeup, are you guys organized by committees or do you meet as a committee of the whole?
we meet, well, as a committee of the whole and as a whole council.
Okay, so there's not separate committees where there's, quote, an environment committee, and we'll just have Kim do that. And
Well, I'm the liaison to the Sustainability Advisory Group,
got it. Okay,
and also to the Bike Walk Advisory Group, and to our trash
got it.
situation. So anything involving anything environmental, I'm the liaison to those groups. So it is to some extent, let's have Kim do it. But then when something comes up, I don't think people understand the urgency of taking the action at a bigger level. You know, or the time frame. I think the time frame is something that people certainly do not get, that we have a limited amount of time in order to take action. We looked at, what did we look at? In our budget, we've got our fleet management, and we're trying to green the fleet, and we've included certain fleet vehicles. We've got a sustainable vehicle policy for certain fleet vehicles, but not all of them, because there aren't vehicles available for some, like snowplows, for example. There are not electric or other alternatives available. But I guess ComEd did a plan for the city, but the recommendations in the plan were not even included in our budget or our long-term capital plan, because they said, oh, it's just, the city staff said, oh, it's just going to take too long to do that. So it's not in the capital plan now because we can't do it yet. That's going to be years out. And I said, but we don't have years, you know, and they just didn't feel it was something that was a priority. So I'm just sort of at a loss as to how to make this a priority for others.
I wish I had the magic answer for you.
I have a thought, or can I add a thought to that? Have you ever written an op-ed?
Oh yeah.
In your local paper? Because one of the
we don't have a local paper.
Okay, right.
You may or may not have heard, there's a bid from Alden to take over the Chicago Tribune.
Yeah.
I mean that our whole region will potentially not have a local paper. So.
Yeah. So I guess the reason I raised that was because it's a big lift, but one of the ways is to help promote those stories, like exactly your story, find ways to get that story out and to get that information into the citizens in your community who are engaged, who do want to act, because they want to act, but they don't know those stories that you just mentioned. They don't know that that's a specific decision that was made in a very short time window, but those are those windows of opportunity where if you could publicize that and get public pressure, and you know, in the right place at the right time, you can start changing some of those decisions. And so it's connecting with the organizers, connecting with the people in your community who are going to add pressure and help back you to cause movement.
That's great. I second that. How have you considered writing a blog? Can you blog about it? Are you active on social media?
I have an email newsletter I send out about once a month. Probably 3/4 of the topics are environmental. And that goes out to about 1,300 people in our community. Yes, I post article. I just wrote an article on electric buses that I posted all over the place. Yes, people know me, but the thing is that when it's always coming from me, I remember my uncle said to me, I think when I was in high school, well, you're taking care of the environment, so I don't have to. And I'm trying to figure out how to, at some point, it's got to be more than me and Edith and the rest of the people on this phone call. And the question to me is how to mobilize people when they see that we're working on it and they think that we're doing such a great job that they don't need to get involved. That's more what it's not that I'm communicating. I've started Go Green Highland Park. I'm a co-founder of Go Green Illinois. I'm communicating to people regionally and locally. Yeah,
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to try to pivot because I see Frank ready to go, and just in the interest of time, I think if this would be a really good time to switch to climate empowerment, because one of the challenges on the next panel on action for climate empowerment in this national strategy was the challenge of what does empowerment mean and who needs to be empowered. So if that's okay, I would like to give the last 25 minutes we have to our next speakers, which we're really thrilled to have Haley Krim with us, who's with the Climate Literacy and Energy Awareness Network, former Greenest Region Corps member from Park Forest. And she is now working with Frank Niepold, who has the best title ever, the Action for Climate Empowerment National Focal Point for the United States at NOAA. And this is a relatively new appointment. So we're really thrilled to have both Frank and Haley with us. And if we could give them an opportunity to talk about climate empowerment and the framework. And I just also want to thank Kevin, so thank you, who's made an appearance, but left me with the reins.
This is a wonderful opportunity and such a rich setup for what we're talking about, because I hear the direct requests for actionable strategies that are going to bring capacity to do the things that have been recommended. So I think I think the sequence has flown very nicely together here. So let me share my screen, and Haley, do you want to say hello? Just like,
yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Haley Krim. I want to shout out Park Forest real quick. I know Carrie and Alex are on the call, but I'm glad to be back with you guys after like 6 months out of the Chicago region, but it's super cool to be invited back.
Wonderful, Haley. So I'm going to do the first bit, then Haley's going to come in, and we're going to wrap up. So we'll try and hit our mark very tight. But I think the sequence of conversations and presentations and questions and comments were really important for where we are in this unique moment. So as Edith said, I have recently been nominated as one of 2 ACE national focal points for the United States by John Kerry and State Department and the administration. So this is a relatively new position. And the reason why it's new is because it's part of the Paris package. And coming back into the Paris Agreement, there are some international expectations of all parties, all countries, to implement that agreement. And one of them is Action for Climate Empowerment. We're going to get into that. But one of the things that in our work over the decades really is that capacity issues actually play a critical role. And as Jen Marlon said, connecting the dots, setting the social norms, and things of that, because our views are determined socially. I think that was a really helps us focus on some of the elements here. So let's get into this. One thing, as I was part of the United States delegation for the COP21 meeting in Paris that led to the Paris Agreement. And after that, we saw this massive explosion of subnational climate action. And this comes from a report, if you're not familiar with the America's Pledge reports, which have now been merged with America is Still In work. And what it clearly shows is that there is an explosion of climate action across the country in a variety of different key sectors, but it's uneven. And one of the leading challenges is making the case for climate action in those communities, making the case, sustaining the case, continuing to make ambitious, urgent, accelerating climate action. So, I mean, everything we've talked about actually reinforces that point. And I'm going to take some more Yale. Actually, I got one more thing here. So in the new America's All In reports, it clearly shows that in those communities, there is a support for new jobs and the transformation of their economies. So a lot of those questions lead to that Jennifer Marlon said, open up the door to something that's really possible right now. And so, but there's a growing interest, right? That key findings that are here, that growing interest, but to support your constituents and members of the target to deliver real and meaningful benefits, connecting the benefits to the concern and actually solving problems in communities that align with their values. This is not how we talked about climate change communications, public engagement, education, all that long ago. So there's a shift that's happening here, but I think that opens up a really important opportunity. That being said, when we zoom in on the municipality data or the metro area data, you see the Chicago region is, supports municipal action. So they support it, not strongly, but they do support it more than the national average. However, you saw in that data, but they're not talking about it. They're supporting it personally, but they're not actively talking about it. That difference is something that we can make progress on. I think that is a critical piece of everything that I said before us, that we have to make progress on activating and mobilizing the constituents in communities in order to take on these ambitious climate actions. If we don't, there's always going to be a limiting factor. So the how shows up pretty quickly. So Haley, can you throw this? Actually, we'll just ask you guys to do this in the chat, but what's holding you back? What's holding you back? So these are some of the things that we saw that are holding you back. Political will for climate policy, climate awareness and education of public and leaders, funding and technical support, finding data and evidence-based solutions, coordinating the stopping and reinventing the wheel, communicating successes and the challenges with peers, ways to implement climate solutions equitably. That's just our understanding of what some of these are. But there are other issues that we must, as we build a strategy, and this is what I've been called to do with my colleagues at the federal level, is to build a strategy, but not just for the national strategy, but also for communities across the country, as we saw on that second slide. And so as we're kind of moving into tactics and strategies and outcomes and aligning resources to make differences in critical ways, we see that as part of what we're doing at the federal and national level, but it really is implemented at a community level, whether it's in the Chicago region. I don't know, I'm not paying attention to the chat. So if you haven't put anything there, it would be helpful for all of us to have a better understanding of what are the key things that are holding communities, municipalities across the country back. Because then we know how to build strategies to deal with those. So one thing we definitely know is over communicating and competition for attention is a critical challenge. As Kim was saying in her remarks, cutting through, not just with a message is one problem, who is the best messenger is another part of that, is a really important piece. We are getting more and more bombardment of messages. My phone is lighting up even during this talk, chats and texts, and we're saturated with messages more than we've ever faced, right? So cutting through that, and from our analysis, communication is a critical tool, is a powerful tool, but it's not enough by itself. That's a really important point that we have found. So we're looking at a more wraparound strategies with communication. So our key point today is communication is critical, but that can't be the total strategy. And so, but it's the combination of those with other strategies is what we're really looking at. And you're going to get into those details. We want you to leave with concrete actionable steps as opposed to, there's more problems. But one of the things, the reason I chose that image is making solutions visible that align to values. And intergenerational equity is a really important piece of social value. And so, the jobs of the future are going to be much more in the solutions to climate change than they are going to be in what caused the climate challenge. So, but a lot of these solutions are invisible, and a lot of the benefits are not seen as how they're going to our future generations. So there are programs that are happening. This one just happens to be in New York, but that they're not seen enough. So this framework, ACE, Action for Climate Empowerment, used to be in Article 6 of the treaty and Article 12 of the Paris Agreement. I'm getting bathed in this international language. Is that but when we looked at it and really understood some of these international expectations, we found tremendous power because it aligns education, which is where I come from mostly, with training and public awareness, public access to information, public participation, and coordination, all working together as a set of activities to accelerate just climate action. That's the more and more we look at it is incredibly powerful. So I'm going to stop and turn this over to Haley now. So Haley, let me know how you want me to steer you through these slides.
Sounds good. And also we have a Zoom poll if we can get that going right now.
Oh, yeah.
So just to talk a little more concretely about these 6 pillars of ACE, this does come from the Paris Agreement, but we found that it applies really well to the US context. Basically, how I approach it is if you imagine everything you need to solve climate change, ACE, like the technology and the science are already there. We know that we need to be moving and we know that we have ways to get started on it right now. ACE is everything else that you need to get to that social change and that full, across society mobilization. So it powers the social and cultural and political pieces that have been found to be the last hurdle to climate action across the country. So specifically education of all types, not just K-12, but colleges and informal education, so like museums and parks, things like that, training and workforce development, public awareness in general, which can include social movements as much as media, as in public access to information is similar, public participation, civic engagement, all of these environment commissions and everything that this area is so good at. And of course, coordination both subnationally and internationally. So if you want to go to the next slide. Yeah, and specifically in your area, ACE work is already happening and these ACE adjacent organizations and institutions already exist. So we're talking about school districts, community colleges, technical education, universities, parks, all of you have, professional development programs, as I said, social movements, NGOs, businesses, faith groups, media, particularly broadcast meteorologists are some of those very trusted messengers. And then of course, state, tribal, and local governments, you're all doing ACE work or ACE adjacent work. And so in all of these organizations in your community, they may have a robust climate empowerment project or climate education project or something like that. And if they don't, they probably have at least 1 or 2 people who are interested in starting them. So a survey of your organization or your community's resources that already exist can really help start coordinating all of these things and moving towards a society-wide action, not just in your community, but also nationally. And of course, organizations all across the country are doing this work, and that's where the coordination comes in. So again, they are geographically and demographically distributed unevenly. So the idea of Action for Climate Empowerment is to coordinate all of these actors across all of the communities in the country to share best practices, to reduce duplication of work, distribute resources more evenly, focus on justice, and increase capacity in every town to help you reach your climate goals and to help the nation reach its climate goals. So if you move to the next slide. Oh, back one actually. So in practice, ACE will shift the entire culture. It's not just on you, it's on everyone, towards equitable action across all aspects of society. So having these institutions working on it and coordinating climate education, engagement, and training across all aspects of the community will help you build political will. It empowers residents and educates residents on how they can take action and inspires them to do so everywhere that they interact. It also prepares your workforce to take advantage of the coming quality jobs, and it will distribute financial and technical support more equitably than it is now on a local and national scale. So now if we go to the next one. So climate empowerment is, from its start in the UN, centers climate justice, and it's built on equitable participatory processes, which as local governments you're all familiar with. Because we're talking about whole of society climate action, everybody has to be involved in the building of solutions, and those solutions have to address historical inequities. So ACE also, in addition to having participatory processes, uplifts traditional ways of knowing, centers marginalized voices, and prioritizes resources for the communities that are most impacted by climate change. And this is an example of an ACE program for offshore wind careers with the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, who are not federally recognized in Massachusetts, to provide them a pathway to get into high-paying offshore wind jobs. So if you move to the next slide. So how do we get there? What are we doing for it? It's going to take a massive effort to start coordinating all of these actors. So last summer, individuals and groups that work on all of the 6 ACE pillars, so education, training, public awareness, access to information, participation, and coordination, they all got together to write a framework for implementing Article 12 of the Paris Agreement, Action for Climate Empowerment, in the US. And this framework was published in November and is available at aceframework.us. I'll put it in the chat. Sorry. And if you move to the next slide. So all kinds of people, scientists, executives, activists, youth, and a whole bunch of different people were involved in the framework. This is just a real quick snapshot of the people who were involved in writing it and the dialogues that preceded the publication. If you go to the next slide. After the framework was released, it was signed by over 500 signatories, so 150 organizations and 343 individuals active on ACE, including the Yale Program for Climate Communication, as well as several public school districts, including San Francisco, the Urban Climate Change Research Network, several tribal nations like the Penobscot Nation, as well as some environmental NGOs like We Act for Environmental Justice and the National Wildlife Federation. So you go to the next slide. Just a quote from Chris Castro, who's the Director of Sustainability and Resilience in Orlando. He said that an ACE national strategy, especially one that emphasizes decision-making and actions in and by local communities, is an integral part of our journey for shaping the future that we want. So I'll pass it back to Frank to talk about the national strategy.
Awesome. Thank you, Haley. And so I just want to, as I'm thinking about you and the work you're doing, what we found was, and I heard it in the questions from the people who were joining us today, is that working out how do we do what was recommended earlier by the previous presenters, we need a plan. I've been doing this for 25 years in various capacities. And if we don't have a plan, it's really hard to tackle the constituency and capacity issues that are in communities relative to climate. It's just very challenging. So I think that what we're doing to offer a way forward, and we need a coordinated strategy. We need success. While we're also dealing with the intersectional dimensions. But we know that jobs is a very important piece. When we were talking about earlier in the rural-urban divide and a lot of the extractive communities that are really concerned, a lot of that concern is because they don't understand how they're going to have a future if that extractive industry goes away and we go with another path. That is a real challenge. I am sure you all are aware of these challenges in one way or another, but we have to have a plan for doing this. And we see clear pathways, but we have to work together to make those pathways real, on time, in equitable ways. And so that means we need to align, amplify, and support these efforts. Whether you call them ACE, you call it community college, you call it, career and technical high school, you call it broadcast meteorology. I mean, ACE related means all of those things in a much more intentional way. I've had the distinct honor to work with so many amazing partners across the country doing these efforts, but we're not aligned, working together to ultimately support communities like those who are represented in this call. And until we get much more intentional and in a we're going to have a hard time of doing this. Now, I work in the administration, and so the goals that we have here, I think, are very aligned with what a lot of the communities are struggling with, which is elevating the work, providing jobs, and solving problems that benefit communities. Those that we're aligned in those spaces. So you know, but also let's appreciate that as the United States comes back into the international treaty, we have to have some international visibility, but that visibility isn't the national visibility always. A lot of times it's coming from the communities across our country and showing that we're demonstrating this work internationally, but also providing an opportunity for collaboration from the international community back into communities across the United States. Part of my function and my co-focal points function is to be that bridge, the liaison, both from the international community to domestic communities and back and forth. I also want to call out one point that in the United States, when we look at this work, the intersection of justice and climate solutions is actually very strong in the United States, but it's actually unique in the world. A lot of other places around the world aren't connecting these two as strongly as we are right now. And so I think that for me, that's a sense of pride. It also gives us a sense of how we do this work within our national circumstance. But we have to have evidence that certain strategies and techniques are making a difference and which ones make a difference. And that's a challenge that we still are trying to work on. And so a lot of this is emerging. This is not robust yet. We're just emerging. But we definitely see the participatory process. When I looked at that poll that Haley, you put together, it doesn't surprise me that public participation is the strongest alignment with your work. And so working out strengthening those participatory processes is a critical piece to support local decision making. So, you know, our ask is that you know, in whatever way possible, as we move forward this agenda with the administration, that you, if you feel value in what we're talking about, and we don't have a plan, we need to create a plan together in very near term, so then we can run the plan, align the resources, find the gaps, and make the progress together. So this is not our plan in the sense it's a national, you know, federal government plan. It is our plan in the sense that all communities, all levels of government, all communities are involved in the making of it and then benefiting of it. So, and if you have practices that you're really proud of, that you think are exemplar, sharing them, helping us facilitate that sharing process, so that we can promote that work to other communities. You know, being at the federal level, you know, I see amazing things in different communities all across the country. Part of what we're trying to do is to take those practices and those programs and those innovations and bring them across the country to where there's a need. And so, you know, in order to support your jurisdiction with better ACE work. So that's where we're coming from. So I do want to thank you all for your time. There's our contact information. Please reach out to us if this is valuable to you. And I think, Edith, we're at time, so we probably should stop there.
We are at time, and I think it would be fine if people have to leave. We totally understand, but this has been such, I thought this would be a passionate conversation, and I'm really pleased with how everybody's engaging and great ideas there. Kevin, do you think we could spill over a little bit and get some, see if there are questions for specifically for Frank and Haley that we haven't addressed yet?
Oh, of course, absolutely. I'll defer to everybody else as well. So.
So what we've had some feedback, and I'll just sum up some questions that we've had is, and Frank, I think you addressed these, but Jacqueline and Tim, I think you were on the same thread. And then what Kim said earlier is engaging those who are not leaders on this. So Frank, Haley, is there anything else you wanted to address on how to better empower? And let me just put it another way. So we have mayors who are very, very engaged. How do we help them help the Kim Stones and the Jackies
Yes.
and the Tim Milburns who are working at the municipal level? So a little more, I guess, on how to connect those.
So Haley, you want me to go first?
Yeah, go for it.
So one important thing is, I think that as I'm looking through the chat and the questions quickly, who the messenger is really matters. And there are lots of ways to differentiate the messenger for a specific purpose and get a new result. One thing we know is youth play a critical messenger role, because that intergenerational dialogue is incredibly powerful. They know it. They're beginning to know it, I should say. They're beginning to know it, but we're not just talking about marching in the street. We're talking about coming into the capacity aspect of this issue. Because, you know, we at NOAA, we've been funding grants where we're actually have the lead of a climate smart community, or a climate task force is actually a member of the youth leadership in the community, because there's such a capacity issue. We didn't really drive this point home as strongly as it is true, but you know, going from making a commitment to actually implementing that commitment, usually the communities have a very serious capacity issue on doing the greenhouse gas vulnerability assessments. You know, all of that work requires people that we just don't have the budgets for yet. Bringing youth into that space also gives them the ability to get experience, but also to solve some of the capacity challenges. We all have schools in our communities. I took a quick look at the higher education map for the area, and you have a wealth of higher education institutions in your area. Aligning those capacities into your needs and extending those opportunities is just one example of where this is. But I'll give you another one, which is the NOAA, NASA supported, and NSF actually, Climate Matters program, where we're bringing broadcast meteorologists on air into your local news media to talk about these issues. One thing they need is they need better stories of climate solutions. So they're customizing the climate story for your community, but they need the climate solution stories to put them out to the community. So there's a lot of rich opportunities that are built on existing programs, but we're not all the way there yet. All the wiring hasn't been put together, and that's really what we see as a strategic opportunity here. Sorry, Edith, I'm a wandery, long answered person. Sorry about that. Haley, did anything you want to build on there?
Yeah, kind of, I'm trying to find in the chat, somebody mentioned, you know, they've had more success talking about, you know, not that your solar development will reduce X amount of greenhouse gases, but that it'll save money. I think ACE is a very effective way. It wraps in that communication, but at the same time, you do get those strong, like, metrics and co-benefits to things like education or you know, workforce development, all of that kind of stuff. It comes with side benefits that aren't necessarily related to just the straight up greenhouse gas emissions reduction, that I think can be very, very effective for making the case to people in your community. And once those things start to happen, people will naturally want to come along. So it's like a self-fulfilling cycle. Sorry, my dog's barking. But I think that is kind of key to all of this work, that if we can sort of start moving as a group, or even just one organization, one school, one park, towards this sort of climate and community and justice focused education communication work, it will naturally start to bring along other people. And those metrics will also be coordinated and tracked by the federal ACE effort, so you don't have to do that by yourself. We'll help you make the case.
I think we should be wrapping up, but if I could turn this around and to just summarize some of the thoughts that I've had going through the presentation here, and ask, I really appreciated the way Frank and Haley concluded with the ask, what you're asking of us. If I could go back to the other two Jennifers, and then think about us as and thank you, Jennifer and J-Rob, for acknowledging the Greenest Region Compact. But we are a large coalition of municipalities, and we're just about to launch a climate action plan for the region. So is there any advice, especially watching the dialogue that you've seen in the chat and seeing our participation, is there any other advice that you have for us as an environment committee? Jennifer,
I have
what's-
one, but I'm going to be quiet first.
Okay. I'd say, Jennifer, you go first, but you, that doesn't help a lot now.
Go ahead, Dr. Marlon.
Oh, I wasn't sure which Jennifer. Okay, sorry about that. I think the challenge that's being highlighted here is that many of those of us who are already communicating, the challenge is not about additional communication. I mean, communication is a component of everything, of course, so it's always an issue, but it's about coordination. And I think just because we are so many people now distributed across so many places, it's the organization part that is challenging. And I think it's looking for bright spots. It's looking and mirroring the communities who are doing something right and trying to adopt those models and spread and scale. It's the challenge of scaling that's facing us right now. And I guess my effort has been more on, or our effort has been remembering to bring along the rest of the public, remembering that inclusivity is critical. And so part of this this feeling of frustration, I think, is actually normal and natural, because as the ancient saying goes, if you want to go fast, go alone. And if you want to go far, go together. And so be patient, be persistent, and do what you can to be inclusive and work together to go forward and keep reaching out, and know that frustration, and it's going to take longer than we want it to, but this is a marathon, not a sprint. So those are my thoughts.
That's so great. I second that. I would say, there's so many places to start. You can just pick what resonates with you and start there. We have some, and I'll share out in the chat. We have our American Climate Leadership Awards, and we have these replication guides. Great resource. We have climate action fact sheets. I mentioned our weekly Let's Talk Climate webcast series. And there's actions you can take, on social media, through blogs. I think the resources are there. It's just picking your spot and starting.
So one recommendation, Edith, you gave a very specific ask. I'm going to give you a very specific answer. Make your solutions as you implement the plan incredibly visible. A lot of what we're talking about is completely invisible. If you have rooftops of all the schools in your districts in the region covered with solar panels, no one knows. If the school is benefiting amazingly from energy efficiency and renewable energy, and they're saving hundreds of thousands of dollars, which is happening in school districts all over the country, it's invisible. If all the school buses in your region are electric now, and your air pollution issues are going down, and your asthma rates are also going down, you won't see that except for the intake numbers at local hospitals. They'll be like, what's happening with our asthma rates? I thought we used to see about this many asthma attacks a year, and now we're seeing less. Completely invisible. All of these benefits, because it's, as Jennifer Marlon said, our views are determined socially. But in order for that to change, we have to do work to take these programs and plans and make them seen as visible. And I think, there's a saying, in communications theory, do good things and be seen doing good things, right? You know what I'm talking about. I know where that comes from. So, but it's a really important process, because just the last point, I really think this is a critical piece. If you're tearing up streets to remove localized flooding patterns, and all they see is somebody's ripping up my street, knocking off my parking because you're putting in much thicker pipes to handle, increased precipitation patterns, all they see is you just tore up my street. They have no idea that this action is connected to climate change. And so that's where, public engagement, public participation, public work to help connect the dots, another point Jennifer Marlon said, is going to be really critical to the implementation phase of this effort, or else you won't get the long work. It'll be episodic, and we can't do episodic.
Fabulous advice. Thank you for that. I do think we have to wrap. Thank you so much for the really dynamic chat and all of those terrific links. And thank you to everybody who's participated and asked really great questions and some tough challenges. I will say before you start to sign off, we do have the next Environment Committee meeting, but I know this looks like we're carefully orchestrated. We usually come up with ideas very quickly. So if you have a topic that you haven't shared yet, I think we did survey all of the Environment Committee members soliciting topic ideas right before the pandemic started. So if you wanted to put together, just drop something in the chat that we haven't addressed in a while, or you think really is better addressed at a regional level, please let us know. We're always happy to be responsive, or send a note to Cheryl or I. Want to wish everybody, so the next Environment Committee meeting on May 18th, it's always the third Tuesday. Remember to go to the web site for notes and for the presentations and for the links. And then also happy Earth Day to everybody on April 22nd, and happy Arbor Day to everybody on last Friday in April. I know some of you are from different states, but in Illinois, that's April 30th. So again, thank you for joining us. Kevin, did you want to say anything?
Just to echo all your comments and all the comments I see in the chat room. Thank you all very, very much for participating. These are always, I believe, very important and insightful sessions. And this one, of course, has hit the mark. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for making the opportunity for us to engage you all.
Yeah.
Happy Tuesday, everyone.
Thank you.